And according to John's gospel, that's all you have to do. Believe. Trust. Place your trust in Him. And I hope you've done that this morning. I'm Pastor Joey, and it's a privilege to talk to you out of the Bible each week. And today we are looking at another message in the long line of sermons that we have done with the broader theme of the spiritual dark ages, a hero must rise. We've pretty much worked our way through the entire book of Judges for the most part, and I'll be referencing a couple of things from that book here this morning. But we will be looking at another passage outside of the Judges, I think, that will help amplify themes that are found within Judges. And I don't know, perhaps you've watched a movie before and they show you something that happens in the movie, and it's the characters you don't know anything about, the action, the adventure happens, and then it's about 2 or 3 minutes, and then they just flash back to the very beginning, and then they begin to develop the story. So I've noticed that in movies lately, it seems that a lot of them do that. They show you the end first, and then they go back and fill the backstory and bring you to the end. In a way, that's what I'd like to do here this morning. I'd like to show you the end, and then I'm going to go back and bring you to the end as we work our way through. So if we would just skip to slide number 6 this morning. I went to the eye doctor this week, and he says I need bifocals. At this point, I'm refusing to wear them. So if I do this a little bit, you'll understand what I got going on. He said that's basically your 2 choices, is you either get them or you don't. And if you don't, you have to take your glasses off. So take your pick. So at this point, I'm taking my glasses off, all right? And I'm looking down like this. So you'll work with me, right? All right, here we go. Slide number 6. A long time ago, several weeks ago, we read Judges 3:31. After Ehud came Shamgar, son of Anath, who struck down 600 Philistines with an ox goad. What I want you to see here, though, is he too saved Israel, or Israel. He saved Israel. He too, in a long line of heroes, this guy was one of them that helped to preserve this nation in the spiritual dark ages. And so, what did he save Israel from? From national disintegration, from societal annihilation, from cultural destruction, from personal heartache and grief. It was all of these things. And Shamgar and all of these heroes and sheroes in the book of Judges saved Israel, and thus preserved the very people group through which Messiah was promised to come. It's very intriguing. So we can't do a series on Judges where we talk about the various heroes without having come through the book. Now we take a couple steps back and we begin to get perspective on what just happened. What did we just walk through? And we just walked through a story where God in His sovereignty preserved a very weak, fledgling, vulnerable nation in a time when their destruction was so on a paper thin footing. They could have easily been annihilated during this dark age period. In fact, all the nations that rose up against Judges, or against the nation of Israel, and the Judges delivered them. Of course, they had no king, right? And everybody did what was right in their own eyes, and this made it worse. But they had no king. God raised up heroes that would deliver them. And just like the book of Judges, all the nations of the earth, according to the prophets, will eventually turn against this little nation called Israel. And just like they did in the dark ages of the Judges, they will seek once again to annihilate this people, the Jewish people. This global hatred will be spewed upon them from the world, and then they will repent, and just like Jesus said that they would. And when they repent, then the second phase of the second coming proper occurs. Not the rapture of the church. It's the second coming when the nation of Israel repents. If we go to slide 7, I'm still working on my picture here, showing you the end of the movie. Okay, we're still developing that. Jesus has just come into the city of Jerusalem. He has just rode his donkey into the city. And what's amazing is that God raised up a hero in the spiritual dark ages, and we executed him. The hero rides in. And when he rides in, he's teaching in the temple precincts. And when he's there, he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem. It's a metonymy. What he's saying is nation of Israel. It's kind of like if I would say Washington, D.C., Washington, D.C. What am I saying? United States of America, right? Jerusalem, Jerusalem, your power center. You who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather you and your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. I've actually seen that. It's really, really touching. And you were not willing. God raised up a hero for you from the dark ages. Look, he says, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Israel, he quotes this messianic psalm from the Old Testament. And he says, until you repent and say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, just like the psalm says, you're not going to see him. You're not going to see your king. And boy, that's still in effect. But when they repent, then look out, because the king will arrive. Not just in the rapture. He will arrive on planet Earth. His feet touches down the Mount of Olives. There's a quake. Those nations who are endeavoring to defeat and destroy his people will be dealt with an utter final blow. And he will usher in a millennial kingdom. That's what this is about. That's what the book of Judges is about. There was a time when in the spiritual dark ages they had no king. And finally a king in David came, and David was given promises that eventually you are the beginning of a long line of Davidic kings. And eventually there will be an ultimate fulfillment of the promise I make to you, King David, that there will be a seed from within your family who will eventually rise up, and he will be a king. Not only of Israel, but of the entire world. And the book of Judges shows you how eventually Israel, without a king, what would happen, what it looked like with a king. It didn't go so well with King Saul. King David became the king. Things got better. So a lot of people feel like it's a polemic. The book of Judges is a polemic, an argument for the monarchy. But not just any monarchy. It's an argument for a God-honoring leader. And when David finally comes, he's given promises. Now, we've looked at this in the book of Revelation. I've laid this out for you. But there is an evil presence of darkness in the book of Judges. There is a satanic-inspired anti-Semitic assault in the book of Judges. And when we are in the dark ages, the new dark ages, this anti-Semitic assault will heighten once again. And it is in fact heightening, and has been for quite some time. And if Satan can destroy Israel, then he can destroy the people who hold the key for the second coming proper to occur. And thus this explains why there has been this vehement hatred for the Lord's people all of these years. With no Israel, there's no one to ask for him to come back. And thus Satan would be free for all eternity to roam and molest and ensnare and enslave and oppress and destroy God's good creation if Israel could be destroyed. The world doesn't know this, you see, but we do. It's a family secret. The world could know it, but they don't. But we understand what this is about in the Middle East. We understand the storyline in the Bible. And so I want you to see here in this opening scene of my movie I want you to see a weeping king standing in the temple precincts of Jerusalem, at the very heart and center of the power structure of the world at that time in that nation. I want you to see a king who stands there humbly after riding, mocking our concepts of power. Instead of a white stallion, he's on a lonely, lowly donkey. And he comes in and says, "Here I am." And what's really amazing is, to the day, Daniel predicted that it would be this way, the prophet. And Jesus arrives to the very day Daniel had calculated in the Old Testament. Your king is here. What will you do? That's the opening scenes of the movie. And now as we transition to Psalm chapter 2, maybe a little Misty Mountain clip might do good here in the transition. A little Misty Mountain deal. We're transitioning. Just go ahead and play that thing. Kind of reminds me of from The Hobbit. It kind of reminds me of the Dark Ages, the book of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. Slide number 2. In those days, Israel had no king. In those days, Israel had no king. Judges 21:25. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. And what happens when everyone does what they see fit? It falls apart. Well, the Psalms speak to our King. The Psalms are all roughly messianic. And Psalm chapter 2 is no exception. In fact, it's explicitly messianic. And when I say messianic, what I mean is that the Psalm was written in a historical context consistent with what David was going through. But it wasn't just that he was writing about. It's messianic in that there's a double referent in the psalm. And so there's another king, a coming king, who is referenced in the psalm. So while the psalm has direct application and interpretation in light of David's historical context, there is also a coming one who has been promised, who will rule and reign. And this psalm talks about this double referent, this messianic age, this Messiah who would come. And so we're going to look at Psalm chapter 2, and the second Psalm actually, the second Psalm. This will be the second chapter of the book of Psalms. And this Psalm moves in 3 directions. Verses 1 through 3 tells us that human beings hate the true king. We hate the king. We resist the king. We plot against him. The middle section of the psalm tells us that we have a king above all kings. A king behind the kings. The one true king, and he's installed by God. That's the second movement of this psalm. And then the third movement and last section of Psalm 2, verses 10 through 12, tells us that we need the king. It's a summons for all of us to see that we will never have blessing and joy in the kingdom without the king. So the psalm moves like this. We hate the king. We have a true king. We need the king. And it ironically works its way through in that we have this true king, yet we hate him. And yet we can't live life without him. Slide number 3, the first movement, we could call it, we hate the king. Verse 1, why do the nations conspire and the peoples plot in vain? This psalm, it's really strange because it starts abruptly with conspiracy. And David is the author, and he's the authorship is attributed to him in the book of Acts in the New Testament. So we know David wrote the psalm. They were written by many different people. David wrote this one, though, in particular. And he begins with kind of a rhetorical question. I don't think that he's seeking information. I think he understands why nations conspire and plot. I don't know that he's necessarily looking for answers, but in a psalm is poetry, a psalm is a song. And so he's saying, in kind of amplifying the idea that there's a constituency of people who will rise up against the rightful king. And he expressed amazement that nations would try to overthrow the Lord and the king that he had placed on Israel's throne to serve as his vice regent. And why do they plot? Well, if you become a king in these days, if you became a king in David's day, this was about 100 years after the Dark Ages had closed and the monarchy had come. About 100 years or so that David lived after 1000 BC, which was the Dark Ages ran about 1300 to 1000 BC. And now about 960, 950 you have King David and his reign. And so not even quite 100 years after the Dark Ages, David became the king, and in those days, if you became a king, you had many kings who did not want you to be the king, and they couldn't wait to test the new king, the new kid on the block. And so they would plot against him right away. In fact, on slide 8, the Apostle Peter saw in this very first verse of Psalm 2, slide number 8, he sees in this a prophetic fulfillment that in fact, not only did the people plot in vain and the nations conspire to how to overthrow King David, they also conspired as to how to overthrow the true king when he came riding into Jerusalem on a donkey. And Peter sees it, and he says, you spoke by the Holy Spirit through the mouth of your servant, our Father. By the way, the Holy Spirit is behind the authoring of the Old Testament. Okay? Just as He is the New. The Holy Spirit in the mouth of your servant, our Father David. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? There's like 7 to 8 explicit quotations of Psalm 2 in the New Testament. If you take into the allusions and things, you'll be up to about 18 or 19. This is a major psalm in New Testament usage. Here it's quoted in Acts 4. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? The kings of the earth rise up. You see, these pseudo-heroes rise up. We need a true hero to rise up and to be heroic in the Dark Ages. And these other pseudo-kings, they rise up. And the rulers band together against the Lord and against His anointed one. And indeed, Herod and Pontius Pilate met together with the Gentiles and the people of Israel in this city to conspire against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed. Isn't that crazy? Just like Psalm 2 said it was going to happen. Jesus is the ultimate fulfillment of Psalm 2. Just as Peter says it here, He is born of David's lineage. He has a right to David's throne. He's the Son of God in a unique way. He is the one who will ultimately subdue all enemies under His feet. The prophets looked for the day when Israel and Judah would be ruled by a Davidic king from Jerusalem, and the nations would be subject to Him. Jesus is the referent. The Messianic referent. Not only does Psalm 2 apply to David, it applies to Jesus too. Well, finally Jesus comes. And what did the kings of the earth do? Slide number 3, verse 2. They rose up as anti-heroes to try to conquer the rule of the one true king. And the rulers, they banded together against the Lord and against His anointed, saying... So the English word Messiah comes from the Hebrew Mashiach, which means anointed one, the word used here. And these terms were taken in Greek as Messias or translated as Christos. And so Jesus the Christ is thus the anointed king par excellence from the line of David. And there were numerous messianic prophecies in the Old Testament. There were numerous anointed ones or little messiahs, plural, those kings who ruled in Israel. But Jesus is the capital Messiah. He is the ultimate fulfillment of a long line of Davidic kings. And when He comes, that's why the gospel writers, Matthew and Luke, tie Him so carefully to Davidic lineage. They want you to see our one true King has arrived. And just as the king of David's day plotted against him, even so the kings of Messiah's day have banded together against him. And in fact, the nations of the world who are leading in rebellion against the one true king are once again conspiring. How can we defeat the rule of the king? How can we destroy? How can we be safe from the sovereign rule, especially of a king who comes and rules us? A satanic inspiration to destroy the nation of Israel is behind all of it. Because they are the theological, eschatological linchpin that holds the future together. What do the nations want? They want freedom from God's rule. Verse 3, let us, plural, they're all together conspiring. Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. Often you would be chained and shackled if you were conquered by a king. But in this case, they are viewing the one true God, the one true King, in His righteousness and holiness. They are viewing Him as chains and shackles, when really what He asks of us is to liberate us, to be who we really should be, and what we should be. But so there's an arrogant tone in this psalm, Psalm 2 verse 3. Let us break their chains and throw off their shackles. We don't want to submit to King David. Furthermore, we don't want to submit to the king behind King David. And the kings of the earth don't want to acknowledge their Maker. They don't want to acknowledge their owner and any demands that He might make of them. And so, of course, there are times that we throw off chains and shackles. But when you view God's rule, the one true God, the one true King's rule, as chains and shackles, it's tragic because you move away from the King. And so if we were going to summarize this first movement, again, the psalm moves in three directions. And if we were going to summarize this first movement, we would have to say that these first three verses of Psalm 2 show us that we hate the king. We plot against the king. We band together against the king. We conspire. We'll meet with this one, and we'll meet with this one, and we'll meet with this one, and we'll get a majority, and finally we'll make a stand against the true king, the true leader. This is not just the actions of kings in David's day. It's the action of every human heart. You know, there's a memory trace in our natures. There's a memory trace in our thoughts, our disposition, our stories. In our primal hearts, deeply buried, there is the story of a king and a revolt long ago. This cosmic revolt, we read about it in the book of Genesis. It's as old as the Garden of Eden, when the first man, Adam, a vice-regent, he who was given stewardship responsibility and the authority, and he named animals, and he took care of the garden and all of these things. You see, there was once a king who gave us authority to rule and reign on this planet. He made us stewards in the kingdom, but an impostor suggested that maybe we should throw off the yoke of servitude and throw off the chains and throw off the shackles of this king who has enslaved us into this thing we call life on this planet. And at his suggestion, we joined in the cosmic revolt and we threw off the yoke of the king. And we set ourselves to plotting and rising up and in rebellion. And so we break chains and shackles imposed by the cosmic king. And it starts with parents. You know, you're not going to be my king. You're not going to be my ruler. And then it moves to students, and I don't have to listen to those teachers. And then it moves to employees, and I don't have to do what he says. And then it moves to life. I will be the king. And this memory trace works itself all the way back to the garden Let's throw off the yoke. Let's attack the messenger of the king. Let's plot the demise of the kingdom. Let's band together in rebellion, and maybe we can succeed. And we'll teach Darwinism and evolution just so we can be intellectually satisfied atheists. And we'll go this way in our morality, and we'll set life up this way, and let's throw off the yoke of the king. You see, there's a true king, and we hate him. Slide number 3. The second movement of Psalm 2. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. The Lord scoffs at them. So how does this scene of raging hostility strike the true king on the throne? Is he stricken with terror? Does he fly into a panic? Does he call an emergency session of the heavenly cabinet and say that these little kinglets on this planet Earth have decided that I'm not going to be king anymore? What shall we do? Does God get into a panic? No. According to the poet, he just laughs. He scoffs at puny men, little kinglets, as they parade briefly across the stage of history. These little finite beings who rise up and shake their fist at God and fume and fuss about His kingdom and the way He runs and rules the world. God just laughs. Now remember, this is poetry. And the poet is trying to express something in a human term, a God who is not a human being. He's trying to express in human terms what God's response must be like so that we can understand it. You know, everybody enjoys a laugh. I don't think anybody enjoys being laughed at, but I think we all enjoy laughing with, don't we? It's a universal experience. In fact, we are the only living thing that can laugh. Did you ever think about that? Your kitten cannot laugh. Your dog cannot laugh. He can wag his tail, but he can't laugh. The elephant with an amazing memory cannot laugh. The gorilla with enormous strength cannot laugh. Laughter is part of being in the image of God. Everybody loves a good laugh. And sometimes, though, there's another side to laughter. Sometimes when we hear of something preposterous or outlandish or just simply without rhyme or reason, we often say, "Don't make me laugh." Right? You know, when your teenage son comes home and says to you, "Dad, hey, I think I can take you in arm wrestling." Don't make me laugh. Right? And you might even add a pfft on there. Right? Haven't you done that before and thought that before? There's a time when all of heaven resounds with the laughter of God. And when puny kings of the earth have set themselves up against the Lord of the universe and begin to taunt Him, God says, "Don't make me laugh." When the subjects denounce the king, don't make me laugh. When the finite riles against the infinite, don't make me laugh. When the temporal revolts against the eternal, don't make me laugh. And when these high-handed, bold kings rise up and declare that God and His Word are finished on planet Earth, all of heaven just erupts in side-splitting laughter. It's comical. Look at this. Yeah. They think they're in charge. In fact, I came across some clips. This is what happens in heaven when puny kings run it. When puny kings decide they're going to rule. That's what happens in heaven, see? Little wardrobe malfunction.
Oh, shoot.
Okay, hold on.
Oh, you were going to go.
He totally loses it now. The wedding is over.
Just didn't grab the ring before we die. That's all right.
The room is mic'd up.
Edward,
Take this ring
take this ring.
as a sign of my love and fidelity.
It's the sign of my...
Hey, come on. Come on.
In the
Okay.
name of the Father,
In the name of the Father,
and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
and the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Complete.
Sorry.
Sometimes the Holy Spirit gives us surprise gift.
You think so? That was hilarious.
This, according to the poet, is what God in heaven does when puny man raises his fist, jumps up and barks his bark. Heaven just laughs. Really? Really? The kings of the earth try to make covenants to band together in order to kick God out and off the throne? You're going to kick God off the throne? God just laughs and laughs. He's probably laughing right now. Silly human beings who think they could ever do such a thing. Slide 4. In fact, after he's done laughing, God rebukes them in his anger. Not because he doesn't love them, no, because despite his love, despite his good gifts, despite even sending of a king that could in fact deliver them from the dark ages, despite all of that, they refuse to give God his place. And so he terrifies them in his wrath at saying, okay, and they refuse to submit to the authority of the king, of the one true king, right? What's the first movement? We hate the king. We hate that he's the king. Secondly, we have one true king though, and we got to deal with that reality. And the fact is, he's going to hold evil accountable, and the book of Judges shows us this. Verse 6, I have installed my king on Zion, my holy mountain. Zion is a symbol or metaphor for the historical city of Jerusalem. And so because God had installed his king on the throne of Israel, any rebellion against him would prove futile ultimately. And so David started the dynasty of kings, and now Jesus not only revived the Davidic line, but he fulfills it. And again, I say it's why the gospel writers are so careful to connect Jesus with King David. A king has arrived, they're saying. The one true king. He showed up, finally, in our dark ages. And he does for us what no other hero could do. Verse 7, I will proclaim the Lord's decree. He said to me, you are my son. Today I have become your father. David's reference to the Lord's decree, declaring David God's son here, goes back to the Davidic covenant in 2 Samuel 7, when the Lord promised that David would always have a ruler on the throne, and that ultimately there would be a one final ruler who would rule and reign over the entire earth, not just Israel, but the entire earth. Verse 8, ask me, and I will make the nations your inheritance, the ends of the earth your possession. This obviously is messianic. The referent is Jesus. David never reigned over the whole earth. He never reigned over having all the nations as his inheritance. but Jesus does. And his line of Davidic kings was promised a universal reign. That is King David's line. And in fact, Jesus, according to Peter and others in the New Testament, is the fulfillment. He is the messianic referent of Psalm 2. Verse 9, you will break them with a rod of iron. Who's the them? The conspiring kings that cause heaven to break out and evoke so much laughter. There's a rod of iron. That you will dash them to pieces like pottery. The rod or scepter was representative of kingship, and iron was symbolic of strength. And God will deal with all the rebellious peoples and nations and kings of the world when He breaks into our age once again and ushers in a messianic age. Some are successful rebels to the very end, despite God's love. And they will be dealt with according to the Psalm. So we have the second movement. Okay, the second movement. There's one true God, but we have to balance that out in light of the reality of the first movement, and we hate the fact that it's so. One of the things that is so interesting in all the cultures of the world is that they all have these stories that go something like this. It's kind of like a memory trace. It's kind of embedded in our primal hearts. And it's there and we don't even know it's there until somebody brings out a movie that talks about a king long ago. And he ruled with wisdom and power and justice all at once. And as a result, everything blossomed. The land, it was developed and it thrived and the people prospered and the culture developed and civilization advanced. But something happened and the king was taken away and everything turned dark. And the hope is that either the king will return or a new king will restore the land back to its greatness again. That story is found in all the great civilizations of the world. It's found in all the great fiction of those civilizations written in the world. Why? Why do we obsess over kings and queens? Why do we obsess over Arthur who rules and he rules in Camelot, and when he rules all is well? When he was here, everything was great, and now he's gone. And when will he come back? And these are the questions of these stories. And J.R.R. Tolkien understood it, and C.S. Lewis understood it, and the Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. And they tell you that once upon a time there was a great king in the north, and when he comes, he will finally come, and he'll finally make everything right, and the spell will get broken, and the rightful king will be installed. And why do we have these stories about kings, and why do we pay money to go watch them in theaters and buy the books and read the stories? Why do the old legends and stories about kings and all of these cultures about them? Why do they impact us so much? Why do we love them so much? Because in our primal hearts there is a memory trace that we adore, and we crown kings and we write stories about them and we direct movies about them, because there's a memory trace of an ancient king who once ruled with justice and glory long ago, and we reach out for him. This king who was worthy of glory. We severed our relationship with him, but something tells us that we shouldn't have. And this memory trace tells us that we need a king, and it's embedded in every civilization and culture. And the age turns dark without the one true king, the one who made us, the one who understands how life was supposed to work, the one that understands how it's designed to work a certain way. We have one true king, but we hate that it's so. Slide number 5. The third and final movement of the psalm. Therefore, you kings, be wise, be warned, you rulers of the earth. We hate the king, there's one true king, and now we're going to see we need the king. You kings, be wise, be warned, you rulers of the earth. In view of the inevitability of judgment on rebellion, David exhorted the nations to submit before the wrath of the great king led him to smite them. Because he's going to come, And if you have bought in with the rebellion, and you have contributed to the great freeze of winter, spiritual winter in the dark ages, when He comes to hold the rebellious accountable, and He comes to smite the wicked, okay? Then you will be caught up in that if your allegiance is not with your one true King. Now stay with me. There's grace in this. Verse 11, serve the Lord with fear and celebrate His rule with trembling. The fear of the Lord in this situation is not a sign of emotional instability, but it's a mark of wisdom. There is a king. We hate that it's so, but we've got to have Him because nobody's getting out of the dark ages without Him. And I love this phrase in verse 12 on slide 5. Verse 12, kiss His Son. Kiss the King, or He will be angry and your way will lead you to destruction, for His wrath can flare up in a moment. And then the blessing at the end, blessed are all who take refuge in Him. In the final analysis, we see there is no refuge from the King. He will overwhelm one age with another. There is only refuge in the King. There's no refuge from Him, only in Him. What does it mean to kiss the Son, to kiss the King? Kissing the King is an act of submissive homage to the King. Kissing the King doesn't mean you make out with the King. It means that you submit to Him and you obey Him because you are ravished by His beauty. You stand in awe of what He is and what He's accomplished and what He represents. And when we swear allegiance, we do so by gesturing, we kiss the King, the psalmist says. Some vassal kings would sometimes do this insincerely. They had the intent of rebelling later when the time was right, but now they definitely were conquered, and so they would kiss the king. They would kiss the ring or the scepter of the king out of a pseudo-obedience, just so they could have time to conspire and sneak together and slurk and kind of slink around in the shadows to build up the rebellion. And finally, when they were strong enough, they would launch out in rebellion and try to usurp and assassinate the one true King. But then there were those who understood that there is one true King. We hate that it is so, but I need Him. I can't do life without Him. And I'm going to kiss the King because it's my only hope in the dark age. Only by taking refuge in God's anointed, rather than rebelling against Him, can the nations avoid the wrath of God when it is poured out against all rebellion. Only in the King. And so we see in summation of the third movement of Psalm 2 that the Psalm indicates, yes, we have one true King. We hate the one true King, but we need the one true King. And there is this memory trace in our primal hearts that is represented in all the great stories of civilizations of the past. We long for a king whose relationship we have been cut off from, but we want our own kings. We want to be our own kings, and we conspire how we can justify our lives of rebellion. But yet we know that unless we surrender to the true King, it will never get any better. The dark ages will become darker. The winter will never thaw. And when the King was here, the winter began to thaw. The dead came to life. The lame became whole. The wine flowed freely in Cana of Galilee. And we did the tragic and unthinkable. We finally had our King. And we killed Him. We killed the King. Friends, the only way to know that you are the King's friend is to admit that you are His enemy first. That you resist living life His way. That this memory trace is true for you. You want to be your own king, but you've tried it and life went dark. The only way that you are the King's friend is to freely say to the King, I've resisted you all my life. I've fought and conspired against you and your servants all my life. I don't want to fight anymore. You're my king. And friends, if you will submit to the king, what you will find is that the restriction that you thought were chains and shackles, the restriction you thought suddenly becomes spaciousness. That servitude eventually becomes freedom. That if you ever pull the yoke of the king off of your life, you will perish and you'll give yourself over to that which will destroy you in time. And so in the end, our lives are hemmed in such a way that the God who has given us all these good gifts, He hems them in such a way that He intensifies those gifts. And when we use those gifts as He has designed, there is no bondage in it. It, in fact, is very liberating to kiss the king. If you have a young lady who wants to be a world-class pianist, what will she have to do? She'll have to assume a yoke. Every day for so many minutes, she'll have to play and practice and work that piano. She may not want to, but she'll do it because she wants to become one of the world's best. As time goes on, though, her artistic skills begin to blossom, and she's able to express herself on that piano in a greater, more magnificent, less restrictive way. Instead of just playing and plunking on a couple of notes, the whole keyboard becomes her world. And because she took the yoke, she doesn't just plunk in her life here and there. She's able to play and utilize all the notes and say so much more with her life because she's taken on the yoke of responsibility and discipline. Her yoke enables her to be more free in time, and she can go up and down effortlessly on the keyboard. And this is the way it works with God and the King. If you will come under the yoke of the King, your life will blossom as you place yourself, as you kiss the King and place yourself under His yoke. If you submit and learn His kingdom now, what you will find is that you'll have a greater capacity to express His glory through your life. What's it look like when we kiss the King? We use sex only for a permanent and exclusive marriage covenant. And then we have the freedom to grow in intimacy together with whom we marry. You see, this is just one example. You don't carry guilt from previous relationships. You don't ever look at someone and think, why did I ever let them do that to me? You don't become the locker room joke. You aren't embarrassed to meet anybody. You're much freer. Why? Because you assume the yoke of the King. Your life is free to express itself now without these other things. You see, when we take on the yoke of the King, our life gets more liberated in reality. When we kiss the King, we use marriage only for the biological and spiritual building of a family. You're free to have children naturally and co-create another person in God's image. A man can't marry a man and expect to know the joys of fatherhood. That baffles my mind. And without fail, all who do this, their world turns dark and depressed and consumed, and their self-worth is destroyed because they refuse the yoke of the King who says, one man, one woman. Use money to advance the training of heroes. Place restraints, parameters on your life so you can have more to spend with what's really important later on. Use time to invest in the great causes like growing your mind and expanding your service and reflecting your God. Use time to grow in this way, and then you'll have more words, more ideas, more beliefs, more stories, more concepts to articulate your life later. Use personal offenses as an opportunity to forgive and facilitate community healing. If you will commit to living a life of forgiveness, as the King says, then there's no offense or no person can control you with what they do anymore. You are free to live your life without the baggage of bitterness and hate, an emotional draw that causes you to be depressed. You're free to say, I love you, even to those who hurt you. You see, when you kiss the King, you assume a yoke, and you find later that the yoke is actually the means of freedom. It's the means of liberty. Set you free. When you come under the authority of the King, just like that little girl on the piano, you'll be able to express your life in many more creative ways. You'll utilize the whole keyboard of God's gifts, not just a few keys here and there. Do we have any Lord of the Rings fans? Maybe some of you are. Yes, some of you. We'll wrap with this morning. You probably have already watched The Hobbit, and some of you have watched Lord of the Rings maybe more than once. Of course, these movies involve the epic struggle between good and evil, and good and evil are personified via various characters created by Tolkien. And these characters will say, real memorable lines that stay with you. And Will has always been a fan of these movies. And he shared a post on Facebook several days ago before he departed on an adventure learning trip with his university. And here's what he said. Pull up slide 9. I hate this filth. The line of Durin will never be wiped out. Okay. Okay. I appreciate the thought. Wonder what he's thinking about that. I read it again. Of course, he has the picture of Azog, the defiler from The Hobbit, who said in his own language, do you smell it, the sin of fear? I remember your father reeked of it. Thorin, son of Thrain, and Azog, the defiler, represents all that is evil and wrong in the world. But I couldn't get away from the quote. Will, where did you get that from? I didn't get it from anywhere. I just that's what I was thinking, so I just shot it out there. Okay. But I still couldn't forget it. As I was thinking about drawing the book of Judges to a close, why did that quote stand out to me so much? A random quote nestled somewhere between a trip with adventure learning and theology and Old Testament and ROTC and German marches. Somewhere this quote comes out in all of that. What are you thinking? What's behind it? Because it's touching me. And finally I realized why. I could see the parallels with the series that we've been through and what God is up to in the Bible. Because there's so much human created filth in the world of the Judges. There's the oppression, the slavery, the killing, the rape, the savagery. There's an atmosphere of violence that emerges. Mutilated flesh, broken bones, crushed heads, gouged out eyes, pierced entrails, sacrificial daughters, dismembered bodies, and similar atrocities. And if you've been in every sermon of this series, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Because we've talked about all of these. And worst of all was the gang rape of the Levite's concubine by homosexual Benjamites, ending in her death. And as I went over this material and wrapping up my closing arguments last week, I thought this truth. I thought of this line. I hate this filth, but the line of Messiah will never be wiped out. And I think that's why I couldn't get away from what he said. In the movie, it's the line of Durin. In the Bible, it's the line of Messiah. And as we look in the book of Judges, I hate this filth. But the line of Messiah will never be wiped out. There is a presence of evil in this world. It is aligned against the plan of God to save a fallen and severed race. Forces were unleashed in the early years of Israel's existence in an attempt to destroy the Messianic line, the very nation through which Messiah would come. And the defiler was at work in the world to defeat this nation in its most vulnerable state. And yet somehow through it all, I hear Yahweh, the God of Israel, sovereignly proclaim, and He's laughing with side-splitting laughter in the heavenlies, and He says in an authoritative voice, the line of Messiah, the line of the tribe of Judah will never be wiped out. I will ensure that a hero rises in her most defenseless moments that will result in her being preserved. And the promise that I have made will be fulfilled. There is a long line of kings, and He's coming, and He came, and He will be coming back. I hate this filth. But the line of Messiah will never be wiped out. Will you be heroic? Will you kiss the King? Do you hate this filth? Would you like to align with God's purposes in the world this morning? Without judges, there would be no prophets, no Israel, no Old Testament, no Pentateuch, no Joshua, no Messianic line, ultimately no Savior, and ultimately no people of God that will ask eventually for the Messiah to come and save them from a near annihilation and destruction. But because of these amazing, unassuming, impossible, flawed heroes, the line continues. And this morning, all that remains, are you willing to kiss the King? Would you like to swear allegiance to the King? Do you hate this filth? Would you like to align with a greater story than your own?